Oh, don't worry. I'm not judging you.
And we are live, and I am totally judging Ro, and it's horrible.
You won't be the first, you won't be the last.
We are here today with a man who makes very poor decisions because he's on our show, Michael Schultheiss. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. It's lovely to be here, and I guess we'll see if it's a poor decision or not. I felt like maybe it's a good decision. We've all got our, the Shave Paint Club, the cue ball.
Oh my, look at that! Yeah.
Yeah.
At least you have the decency to hide it with a hat.
Yeah, this is the very bald hat. It's just like I'm very bald, but I guess the hat like accentuates it or something. That's the meme anyway, that the newsboy cap makes it's like, okay, you're obviously really bald. Which I am. Okay. Green screen your hotel room. If you're in a green screen, you got to have like some dinosaurs and griffins in the background. And
I've been eating dinner. I haven't had a chance to screw around with this yet. Go ahead, Mike. Okay. Mike, roll a die or something, man.
Okay, so we have a new feature. I was avoiding writing this weekend, and I came up with 20 odd questions for our victim.
Awesome. Let's have the first one.
I was going to let you pick your number, but then Rose says, no, I need to roll a D20 instead. So.
Oh, you guys are D&D nerds. So am I. That's great.
So I have my little dice roll.
I have something similar to that. That is so cool.
And we have number 15.
Okay. What's number 15?
Which is, if your main character had to survive in a post-apocalyptic world, what survival skill would they excel at?
Okay. So hold on. Question time. Which one are we after here? Both?
We can do both.
All right. Well, so if Volataria was in a post-apocalyptic world, she would basically excel at kicking an enormous amount of butt. You'd want her on your team because she's not going to kill you. She's not, she's not like Psycho or anything. And so she's going to be good at, if there's predators, monsters, whatever. She comes from a planet where people are kind of, they're tough and they know how to survive. People have to get with guns. She was in the military, so she has all this, special forces kind of combat experience, but also she has nanofiber enhanced muscle, so she's very strong. So she would be fantastic, and she's also not somebody who would, do anything that might be more ethically questionable, which is not true of this guy, the Rostaval saga. So you'd want to be on his team in the sense that if you weren't on his team, he might kill you or enslave you or whatever, because he's from a world, not all. It's very loosely patterned after the Aryan invasion and conquest of India, which occurred in the real world in the 2nd millennium BCE. I use that as one source of influence, and I mixed it with some other things. And there's a lot of fun magic and just a lot of great kind of mostly South Asian, Middle Eastern, Eurasian steppe influences in here. So you think of a ruthless barbarian warrior, you would want him on your side because he would be able to do everything from hunting to killing and enslaving people who would be maybe trying to mess with you. But then there might be some ethical questions you'd have to answer to yourself, like, do I want to be on the same side as this guy? Or, but then the alternative might be to die, so then there's that.
Why doesn't anybody ever have a barbarian warrior who's in touch with his feminine side?
Because barbarian warriors embody the masculine energy.
He doesn't have to be ruthless, right? I mean, he could.
You do if that's the landscape that you're living in. If that's and of course to outsiders, to your out group, unless you ally with them, which may be an option if there's a common goal. But as far as feminine side, I mean, there is some cultural construction there in the sense that, poetry, songs, music, these are things that can be, that the warriors in his culture can be very in touch with. And, so there's maybe some interpretive questions there, How are we defining that exactly?
Okay, and before I forget, Michael, you were in Fantasy Faction with me?
Yeah, we got cut at the same time as my memory.
Yes.
High five.
Right. I will tell people that alphabetically my book came first.
So it was
all right, yeah.
When they cut the first 5, Becoming a Druid was the first. I was like, and I'm out.
I had that same experience scrolling down a few more places than you, but it's like, oh, okay, you know what? Like, here's the thing. I mean, I like I said at the time, full respect to the judges. I appreciate the time reading this book. My first book, it's not perfect. There's some things that I learned to do better in the subsequent books, like drip feeding more information about character, armor design and whatever else. And so, yeah, there's some awkward, clunky things, especially in the first few chapters of this book. But, you got to look at it as, hey, great, it's an experience. And, it's like war. You win some battles, you lose some battles, you learn some lessons, you add to your war party, and then next thing you know it, you're storming Constantinople or whatever.
Yep. I mean, writing for me is like my first book I ever wrote. I'm in a competition with 299 other people of various levels of experience and talent. And, is it realistic? Think I'm going to win?
Right. See, I didn't expect to win. I was like, we'll see what happens. I was like, okay, I'm cut. Well, that smarts a little bit, but it's okay. And I had a lot of fun watching what was going on. Like, okay, who's going to be the next finalist? I think my TBR will probably never recover. Yeah. There's a lot of what was it? I picked up a number of books from the competition, and if I say a number, it'll be wrong. But I'm going to, let's see, the Blood of the Lion is one that I'm going to start very soon. I have that queued, and I've told myself, okay, self, as soon as you finish a book that's not the second Dungeon Crawler Carl book, because I'm binging those ruthless, just going, they're just, I can't put them down, they're addictive. As soon as I finish a book that's not that, then I can pick up Blood of the Lion by, since I'm repping we'll come back to that, I'll get the author's name. Because it looks really cool. The cover is just really fascinating cover. CM something, I'm blanking, but it looks really awesome, and so I'm looking forward to reading a lot more of those entries. And I should put yours on the list at some point too, because Becoming a Druid, and it was Protectors of Britannia, is that right?
Yep.
So you must be into Celtic British Isles.
When I wrote the book, I figured there have been enough books set in the medieval ages, and I was like, I don't want to write another fantasy book there. So, and I don't like guns, so I was like, I can't really bring it forward in time. So let's go back. And I was like, I always want to know more about the Druids. So yeah.
Oh, that's a fascinating thing all by itself. I've been getting into that a little bit for my current thing. Okay, C.D. McKenna, The Blood of the Lion. That's the one that I'm going to read. Next-ish. So the Druids. I've been getting into Celtic stuff for my current work in progress, which is a Bronze Age fantasy that I'm drawing on the Unatice culture of Central Europe in the third and second millennium before Christ. And that's fascinating because it is reasonably thought to be the seedbed of Celtic culture, where the Celts came from, at least in part. These things can be a little bit tricky sometimes. And other groups too, including the ancestors of the Romans and possibly even the ancestors of the Germanic people. So a lot of European cultures are thought, at least at some level of plausibility, to have at least some roots in this culture. And so my version is like, we'll take that and we'll have titans, we'll have literal giants that they have that invaded the world a long time ago, and this ruling dynasty managed to get some help from the gods to enslave them, to not only defeat them, but to enslave them. So now you have these enslaved titans that are these war machines, and that's a lot of fun by itself because you do all kinds of fun things with the magic, but also with the tactics. What are the tactics to get something that big? Setting aside plausibility, because if you're trying to get to biology and physiology, it wouldn't work. But if you set that aside, you hand wave and say, okay, we have that. What can we do with it? And it's shockingly fun. It's so much fun. The tactics, but also what does it happen in society? What kind of resentments end up happening between people who don't want to have to depend on Titans and people who are more amenable to it? And but yeah, Celtic stuff is always a good time. It's always a lot of fun.
So I have
with your stepsister, John A. Douglas.
Can't take these people anywhere.
I have to tell you that I saw on your nice. I saw on your Twitter that Bronze Age book, and I was like, I have to get this when it comes out. I can't wait because.
Well, I'd be happy to send you guys if you want to be. I'm looking for what's the word? So beta readers is the term that my friend Joseph Sale, who is an excellent guy, capital human being, he calls them dragon readers. So dragon readers, I might have to come up with my own version of that. I don't want to just be a plagiarist and rip him off. But so I'll come up with a fun, an awesome term. Maybe I'll call them Titan readers or something, because that would fit with the theme. But if I'm definitely looking for people, especially gentlemen like yourselves who know books, who write books, who might be interested in reading the book. And if you're not, no worries. I'm just putting it out there because I could definitely use smart people who know books and know story to read it when the time comes.
I'm looking for these smart people, but anyway.
No, you guys.
No, you're in the wrong.
Don't sell yourself short.
I mean, I got Grommy here.
You're a tremendous slouch, Judge.
So, and now that I know that your first series is set in the Iron Age, because Britannia's also set in the Iron Age in Britain, so now I'm going to start reading that. So,
ooh, do I sense crossover? A 2-author crossover series?
Never know. Yeah, but I think that one of the most fun things that this thing is just like I could be here all day gushing about how much I love it, but it's so fun to take real world history and also myth and lore. So I've been getting into the lore around, well, just the traditional European cultures, like getting into Indo-European nests, Indo-European gods and myths and legends, and so I have kind of my own take on elves, and that's been a lot of fun to write. It's also my own take on dwarves, because if you dig into it, you find that dwarves originally were nothing like what everyone thinks of now. Oh, a short kind of, burly fellow with a big beard and an axe and talked with a Scottish brogue, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you get into the original source material, if you get into the Germanic legends and you get into the really old stuff, you find that they were seen as elves, as a subtype of elves. And there's a lot of associations with the unconscious, with dreams. There's actually tie-in with the whole incubus idea, with nighttime paralysis, with all of these really cool, deep mythic resonances. And people have lost sight of that. I mean, in the modern, to a substantial degree, in the modern fantasy landscape. And
people have stopped eating mushrooms off the forest floor, man.
Well, I drink mushroom coffee, so I'm rectifying part of that. Some people, so in Oregon, I mean, I've known at least 2 different people who are like, yeah, mushroom. I do, I collect mushrooms, and I'm like, that's great. If you know what you're doing, and you're not going to get one that's going to be a little funny and maybe life shortening, then bully for you.
Well, you always bring a friend, man.
Yeah.
So, Michael, I'm so happy you said that you're doing more Central Europe, because I'm writing an Iron Age book now that takes place in Spain. So I'm like, I got England, I got Spain. I'm like, oh, please don't be doing Spain, please. So,
the Iberian Peninsula is fascinating. The Bronze Age stuff from there, I haven't looked into it very much, but I learned a little bit about the Indo-European expansion into the Iberian Peninsula, and it apparently was pretty thorough. It was like a 40% change in the terms of the autosomes, like the nuclear parts of our DNA, and apparently something like a 100% replacement of the Y chromosome haplotypes. The guy you want Mike, you may already know this guy, but the guy you want is Survive the Jive. Thomas Rosaire, I think is his real name. Let me, I'll just tap this. He has, and also, let's see, Dan Davis History is another one. Both of those gentlemen have amazing videos about Bronze Age Europe and other topics too. Dan Davis does a lot of Bronze Age stuff. Survive the Jive does a variety of like Neolithic and Bronze Age, and he's really into kind of the pre-Christian heritage. So he jumps around, but there's a lot of stuff from both of them about the Bronze Age. And I know that, one of them had something about the LR of the Iberian Peninsula. And I haven't watched that one yet, but it looks really cool.
Michael, how much research do you do before you start writing?
as much as necessary. So this is a fun thing. I tend to find it before I start writing is actually really hard because I don't know what I don't know. So when I get into a thing and I mean, history is the thing that I'm obsessed with. So I sort of follow the whatever is bug is in my brain. Oh, what about that today? So I'll do that. And Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning, that's another excellent, a Substack newsletter. And so I'll read his stuff, and it's just genetics about, the Finns, the Russians, the Chinese, Japanese, whoever. Let's see, he did one about the Germans too. I think at some point he'll probably get all the world, because he just has this big picture perspective. So I'm always like taking in little bits of stuff, and when I'm going to write a book, I'll do some research to try to orient myself. And Yogi Berra, man of culture. Well, thank you, John. And John's book, The Black Crown, I'm going to do a review. I have a 4-month-old daughter, so at some point, hopefully very soon, I'm going to get back to doing videos. But this book is freaking awesome. Bookish, half-orc. He's a great protagonist. He's a lot of fun. There's also a hot-tempered guard who wants to go on an adventure. Cortland Lowhelm is the guard. He's a lot of fun. And there's an Aurochs, and she's kind of a hard-drinking, hard-fighting gal. Oh my God, this is so much. This is, well, thank you, John. My daughter is amazing. JCM Byrne, hey buddy. Yeah, you should definitely read John's book if you haven't yet. And I need to read your book, sir, Wistful Ascending. I feel like I've heard really good things. So, I'm sorry, I got distracted talking about John's awesome book. Research. I do. Oh, you have. Okay, great. So I do as much as I need to sort of get myself oriented. I don't worry too much about all the finer points until I'm into the book. I say, wait a minute. What do I need? Building materials, housing. What do I need there? So I'll go and I'll find that thing. But you want to strike a balance where you're not so in the trenches for too long and getting all it just gets not very time effective if you're going too much off and around. So I'll often sort of let the research process overlap with writing the book. For example, with this book, so there's a lot of Indo-European stuff in here, but I also drew on the trans-Saharan slave trade, and I didn't know anything about that. So I said, I better pick up a book about that. So I did. I started reading that in the context of working on I think it was a draft before this one. Oh, yeah, I think that's true. Anyway, it was that context, and that led me to a primary source, John Lewis Burkhart's Travels in Nubia, which is an amazing book. It's such a trip. And so that let me write about the, yes, sordid realities, but also there's a lot of things that you just wouldn't know if you don't read the primary source. Like the history book that I read was fantastic and helped me to understand the dynamics, but you really need to read primary sources if you want to get some of the finer points of things that have primary sources for them, which is another thing, Bronze Age, there are some primary sources, but it's a much more limited thing. So many aspects of the cross, there's a journey across the desert here, and I'm proud of that because that's probably the part of the book that has the most influence from primary sources, because I was drawing on a number of very specific things from Travels in Nubia by John Lewis Burkhart. He went around the time of I think a few years after Napoleon was defeated. He went down into the Middle East and Egypt and Nubia, and he got really deep. And he talks a lot about many of the particulars of these cultures. And he actually really admired the Nubians. He thought they were much more warlike than the Egyptians, much more noble, much more of a martial race. And thought that if they were more numerous, they would conquer Egypt pretty easily. That was fascinating. He talks about tribes to the east of, between the Nile and the Red Sea that are warlike and fractious and kind of at odds with everybody, and nobody trusts them, and you can't trust them. It's like, this is just really fascinating. All this amazing ethnographic information at a time when the world was so much bigger than it is now, because, you didn't have airplanes in 1817 or whatever it was. But also kind of the fascinating thing too is just how interconnected everything is, even at that point. He talks about people in Nubia having swords, and they didn't make them themselves. They were imported. They were of German manufacture. They were imported long distance. So that by itself, little things like that, things about you need to be going across the Sahara. You have to constantly hit the water holes because you can't. Going like, what does this look like? So you have oases. I know that. You need to be hitting the water holes ideally every night. You can maybe go a night without it, but if you go much more than that, you're going to be in real trouble. Because the point of having your water, all those water bags on those camels, is so you can drink throughout the day. So you can keep your fluid levels up as much as they possibly can in a place like the Sahara Desert, which is not easy, and you do tend to lose fluid no matter what you do. But yeah, all kinds of fascinating things like that. Like, seriously, get yourself a 19th century primary source, like a travelogue. If you're trying to research, like, hey, what was this place like before the steam engine took over okay, maybe a steam engine, but before the automobile and the airplane and mass culture and everybody wearing blue jeans and listening to, I don't know, Shakira or whatever. I mean, I'm dating myself there. Before all of the global culture, what was this part of the world like? Well, Victorian Travelogue probably has you covered. Probably.
So, Michael, you ever had an opportunity to ride a camel?
I have not. That's a thing that I had to rely more on my research for. If it's an Arabian camel, you have a saddle. You sit, as I understand it, you sit on the hump. And if it's a Bactrian camel, you sit. I think you sit between the humps.
Okay.
But these are based on Arabian camels, so that's what I used. That's what I ended up going with. I was originally going to do Bactrian, but I went with Arabian.
If you ever get a chance, I suggest taking a ride on one because it's a very odd gait. It's a very
I've heard about that gait.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know how the hell they race them. I mean, I don't know how they stay on them, much less race them. But it's a very kind of lumbering, kind of pitch forward kind of thing.
Oh, you know? Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah, their evolutionary trajectory is crazy. They're artiodactyls, but it's just this whole they went their own way a long time ago, and it's very unusual, for even-toed hoofed animals. They're very unusual creatures. But yeah, very, very fascinating animals for sure.
And apparently they're tasty too. I don't know. I never ate one.
Oh, that's good to know.
Saudi Arabian supermarkets, they sell camel meat right next to everything else, and
go figure.
It's like that thick, it's crazy. But never tried it.
So, Michael, I've never met someone who researched more than I do. This is glorious.
Oh, well, I'm flattered. Thank you. I think research for me, again, like it's a very sort of, my idea is to have it be an organic process where, I have enough big picture stuff to get going, and then with time, I'm probably going to take the thing I'm working on now is going to be this giant big project. So my plan is to take a little break after I finish the first draft, and one of the things I'm going to do is to do some more research because I want to get enough of the real world tie-ins down pat. And I'm taking some liberties. For example, I have cavalry in this Bronze Age society, and that's not quite accurate. It should be chariotry. My excuse, and I'm going to go with this, is that there is some evidence of horse riding going back with the early Indo-European, like even with the Yamnaya, going back 5,000 years or so. Somebody check me on that. I might be off a little bit, but it's about that. There's at least some evidence that some people were riding horses some of the time. And the other aspect of my reasoning is that it doesn't really make sense to have chariotry if you have titans. And the key thing there is that titans would be very powerful and reasonably fast once they get going. So you would actually need to be on a horse to have any prayer at all of getting away from one. That's more true if the ground is not really flat and open and level, which is what you really want for chariots anyway. If it gets broken, if it gets irregular, a wheeled vehicle can start to have some problems maybe. So yeah, there's some liberties that I've taken, but I try to always have an in-world rationalization why this would make at least some degree of sense.
Yeah. Oh. Hey, Ro, how are you?
Good, man. Roll the die again.
Yeah, let's have some more. This is fun.
I was going to say,
I think it's interesting just watching you two nerd out like this.
Michael's great. We don't even have to be here.
Michael, what do you do for a living?
Well, I do freelance writing, and I have a background in sponsorship. I do copywriting, and the person I work for helps to connect people who have great businesses and ideas and events and speaking and media tours they want to get going with people who can help to fund them, and then you have a nice sort of a symbiosis, as it were, where you get people get sponsored money, and they can go fund their dreams, expand their business, go on a speaking and media tour, and promote the sponsor, which is really a lot of what we self-published authors have to do. Advertising, marketing. I'm not Devin Erickson, so I'm not that great at it yet. But I have an idea that's I think is actually gonna work pretty well for my new thing. Since I can't, as I said, I can't be Devin Erickson, and his epic threads dunking on people who deserve to be dunked on, I might add.
You going to share this idea, or are you going to keep it to yourself and just tease us like that?
Okay. So my idea is, and this is a thing I'm just going to try. With this book that I'm working on now, this story, I'm really indulging my poetic sensibilities. I love poetry. I love epic poetry. So my idea is to write some poems, some epic poems that kind of speak to the warrior ethos that I'm trying to channel in my writing in these books here, and also in this new thing. And I'm gonna put it out on Twitter X with pictures of landscapes and warriors, and so I'm gonna see if that could sort of get people interested in like it's about audience building. So maybe if I show people that I'm somebody who, if I say so myself, can come up with some wonderful poetic, here I am stumbling for words, but some wonderful, poetry, some lyrical poetry. Maybe I can get people who like that and who want a very poetic, lyrical, heightened prose style with, epic themes and grandeur and, and I've said this before, like a lot of this is a huge selling point for me with this new thing. I'm really drawing on Homer, he of the Odyssey, and Richard Wagner. I watched Opera North's performance of the operas of the Ring cycle, the Ring des Nibelungen, and I was very inspired. And I thought, this is so refreshing. It's so different from a lot of what you see in fantasy now. There's no hard magic. There's no spells that you can diagram out. Okay, this many units of force goes into this spell. It has this effect, and then It's like it's this dark, violent, pagan celebration of celebration with tragedy, but it's such a beautiful tragedy, and there's such a profound sense of grandeur in the whole thing. And I was just mesmerized. I watched this and I was just swept away. I said, this is what I want to capture in my next project, in my Bronze Age fantasy. And Wagner is kind of talking about the end point for the Germanic tradition, the Götterdämmerung, the twilight of the gods, and he has his own take on it that's really fascinating. So I wanted to go back earlier, thousands of years, in terms of my real world inspirations, like a fantasy basis for like for these taking these real world cultures from thousands of years ago, use them as a basis for fantasy to talk about sort of the deep history of Indo-European mythology and gods and lore, and to look at maybe more like the origin point of some of these more familiar gods like Odin or Wotan, but in a fantasy setting, and my own kind of spin on it. And that to me is interesting, because you think about human cultural systems, there's always an ecology. I don't just mean what the climate is like, what the land is like, although there is that too. That's a key part of it. There's also an ecology of cultural elements of society. Human societies are living things. So when you're looking at Norse paganism in the Viking Age, that's the end stage of one branch of the Indo-European drama, the Indo-European, the eruption of these Indo-European peoples 5,000 or so years ago out of the Ukrainian and Russian steppe. So that to me is endlessly fascinating. Like, how do you get this radiation, this development of all these cultural influences, and then the migrations and how things change over time? And so to me, that's all very that's the thing that you want to sort of get at. We've had a lot of culture around the Vikings. The Vikings are fascinating, don't get me wrong, but I want to go back deeper into the history of Indo-European peoples and cultures and gods, and draw some of that draw from those deep well springs of myth, of collective memory.
But how do you do that in a way where it doesn't turn out to be the Silmarillion?
Research, and you have to put your own spin on it. I wanted with this project to really, as it's evolved in my mind, I'll put it like this. I thought a lot about narrative, the stories we tell ourselves. And so part of the fun that I'm having with this is I have my own kind of dark elf beings. They're called Dwayastes. And it's actually based on, I took the Anglo-Saxon and the reconstructed Proto-Germanic word for dwarf, and I made my own word based on that. And they're basically dark elves, but they're dark elves that are sustained by this music, this music that is inherent to creation, as it were. And their great quest is to try to destroy the gods, because the gods have introduced order into the cosmos, and the order has deprived them of their original preferred habitat, which is what they call Mother Night. So the dark expanse before the worlds were ordered. And now they've been forced to live in the bones of the earth, of the deep, dark places. They can come up at night, but only if people invite them. And so they're, over time, even down in the bones of the earth, the order is seeping in and pushing away and diminishing, fragmenting their range. And so they've launched these powerful uprisings to try to bring some chaos back into the deep, dark places. And this is not a spoiler. This is, I think, we established very early on. They both failed, but not without winning back some of the deep places. And so I'm trying to give a sense that there is an ecology here. There is the perspective of these dark elves, if you will, factors rather heavily into the story and the point that I'm trying to make, which is that ultimately that you can understand, no shade on people who want to have a story where there's a clear good and a clear evil. And there are some evil people in my story, but I want to talk more about, resentment and grievances and ambition and power, and how these things can warp people on any side you can possibly think of in any conflict. And how maybe sometimes when we have it, like, okay, we have to get revenge, we have to get power, or they've taken something from us. And sometimes the answer is not to keep doing what you've been doing, it's to do something different and to invent a new narrative. That's a key theme in my books, that, sometimes, a lot of times you have a sense in, and this is a thing that I've developed a lot in these books, that, you have these two rival sides, and from the standpoint of my protagonist, they both suck. They're both awful. And so on the one hand, you have, and I have a different take on dark elves in these books, and that one is actually based more on kind of a kind of a hyper militarized, very like obsessively ordered version, and whereas with this new thing, it's all about chaos and creativity and spontaneity. And so if you have dark elves who are trying to destroy your world, and then the other side is this this loosey-goosey spaz of a light-bringing goddess who is mushy-minded and easy to control, and your domineering grandfather, who is your enemy, is controlling her with his with help from this deity that he's working with. That's two unacceptable outcomes. You need a third way, a third position to occupy. And I wanted to develop those themes further in this new thing that I'm working on. So there's a number of different sides, and I wanted to try to be honest about the ways that they all sort of suck, perspective, but also, have people who hopefully, they've grown, they've seen the conflict, and they've grown, or that's what ends up happening with them. And so maybe you think about a way to reframe this, and what options, what strategies what other ways of looking at the problem you might come up with. So my vision, and this is no shade on Tolkien, I'm an enormous admirer of Tolkien, but I guess my thing is a bit more postmodern, and I'm looking at all these different narratives, and it's not that there aren't people who are good and evil. I want to say that again, because it is actually important. But maybe we're looking at, maybe there's too much framing of this in terms of two awful, sucky sides to this conflict, and we need to be more creative and think outside of the same tired, worn paradigms that have got us trapped in these endless and stupid and destructive cycles. And so that is definitely a key theme in the Rostov saga and in this new thing that I'm working on. And maybe it may be a good lesson for real life, but I'll just leave that there as a topic to ponder.
That's the heaviest 10 minutes and 700 hours of this show.
Well, I'm glad to I'm glad to be heavy.
All right, Mike, roll your die, man.
I did.
Okay.
And the question is, let me see if I can find it now. Where'd you go? If your main character took the place of Watson as the assistant to Sherlock Holmes, how would that change the story?
Well, okay.
Let's go Iron Age here. All
right. So if Rostoval is if he's
Watson. Hold it up.
If he's Watson.
Yeah.
Okay, there's going to be a lot more violence. He's going to torture and kill. Like, okay, we think that this guy did it or is involved. His idea is, well, we'll just torture him until he tells us what he knows. And, if there's any, hotties along the way, he might try to seduce them. That'd be another danger. I think that especially in a Victorian kind of setting.
Would he put up with Holmes? Would he put up with Holmes?
Would he put up with Holmes? I think he would have a lot of friction with Holmes, because his way of solving problems is, it's not that we don't use our minds. We do. We use our heads, both of them. We use our brains, but we also use our brawn. We use our weapons. And so, if you figure out this person is a problem, we'll go chase them down and give them a chance to tell you what they know. If they are going to put up a fight, if they're going to be a problem, then a few broken fingers might persuade them to think again about that. I think that there would be a lot of problems there, because the contrast in sort of social expectations between the two would be very difficult to reconcile. Especially, again, a lot of violence, just a very direct method of problem solving. One that involves, you have your bow and your arrows if it's a long distance problem, long range problem. But if it's better to close with the problem, you have a sword and you pull that out, and that's good for hacking and slashing.
So basically, he tells Sherlock, go find clues, and then he does whatever it is he's going to do, and then Sherlock comes back to...
Point me in the direction of the guy you want dead.
While you're chasing down whatever, I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to demand that this person tells me what he knows, and I will expect him to be helpful and cooperative, and if that's not the case, then maybe a little intimidation, and if that doesn't work, then a broken finger or two, probably loosen his tongue.
Okay.
Roll again.
Again. Okay.
You've got 25 questions lined up. Let's roll them, man.
I wasn't trying to use all of them tonight, but this is my all-time favorite. I told you just before Michael came on. If your book was adapted into a Broadway musical, what special precautions would the theater have to take?
Oh my God. Okay, so they.
You ever
These
seen
books.
those things that people get wrapped in, and if they fall down, it expands into something that softens the blow? Everybody would need one of those.
Yeah, yeah. These books. So there's a lot of things in terms of the. There's a lot of fantasy, action, and adventure in these books, so it would be difficult to get that in a Broadway play, Broadway musical. But yeah, there's a lot of adult content in these books, and forewarned is forearmed and all that. That would be you'd have to really edit it down or warn people. Yeah, there's just going to be a lot of adult situations here. If that's going to be, if you need trigger warnings or whatever else, whatever those
Do you
Broadway
have trigger
musical
warnings on your
audiences.
books?
Well, okay, yes and no. My attitude about that for a long time.
Is what? Fuck them if they
My
don't know
attitude
what
for a
they're
long
reading?
time is, look, I expect you, the reader, to be an adult, and if you want an adult, then that's not my problem. I did put a content warning on the book one altar because sometimes we think we do a good job at communicating themes and content. Warning, contains concubinage. But people have bad experiences anyway, so you say to yourself, well, maybe if you put a content warning on that you can sort of gently guide people away if it's not going to be a good time for them. And no shade in terms of what people like for themselves. I mean, I don't want to frame this in terms of there's something wrong with not liking X, Y, Z, or the other thing, concubinage. My thing is, I want to draw you in if it's going to be a good book for you, and if it's not, that's okay. But then I want to gently warn you away. So I did put a content warning, and I don't know if that's the right thing to have done or not. Jim McLean, talking about new favorite word. You might read my books. It might be your new favorite thing to read in fantasy books too.
There's two very distinct ways of looking at this, right?
Yeah.
One way is you have to put something on it so that people don't eat Tide Pods and die. The other way to look at it is people should be smart enough not to eat Tide Pods, and if they do, maybe that's just Darwin working his magic.
Yeah, and it's a thing that I've thought about. I think I'm going to leave the content warning on the book one for now, just because it's a big enough deal for some people. And I was thinking about this. I've given this some thought, and I think part of the problem is that I'm trying to use these books as an exercise in what I call deep ecology. Now, I've said the word ecology in this conversation already. I'm going to reiterate that I don't only mean the climate and the physical environment, although I do mean that too. I view human societies as occupying an ecology that includes not only the physical environment, but also the social environment, the political environment, the cultural environment, what ideas are kicking around. And you cannot only reduce that to the physical landforms and climate, but that does play a role as well. What kind of role it plays will depend on many different factors, including the dynamics of how this culture has evolved, what technology they have, what
concubinage
movements. Yeah. Well, so and that specifically, and this is a thing where I sometimes struggle because I'm such a history nerd that I forget my perspective may have a disjuncture from somebody else's. So to me, it was pretty obvious. Like, well, of course, you have cultures that have either a steppe or a dry land or a savanna ecology, and they're essentially, pastoralists or former pastoralists, and they ride horses and they are obsessed with livestock raiding. Of course, they're going to have lots of concubines because that's what you would expect from that culture. If you didn't have that, it would be a weird thing you'd have to kind of explain. And I think that in practice, most people are probably not as obsessed as I am with the mounted horse tribes of the Eurasian steppe, Eurasian steppe, the Arabian desert. There's actually, I did a little research on the cultures of the Sahel in Africa, the semi-arid grassland region. So there's a culture in these books that is partly based on some of those cultures as well, and that was a lot of fun. So what was I going at? Well, it's inherently a challenge to because one gets so into the material and one's historical obsessions that it can be a little bit tricky. Oh, okay, that doesn't always translate well, and I think part of the problem with these books has just been I'm trying to give a pre-axial age view of the world, where we don't have a moralizing God who says these things are wrong, these things are right. We have a view of the world where, you have a much more sense of local gods, gods of people groups, gods associated with places, and this needs no explanation at all. This is most of human history. There's spirits and gods that have power to a degree, but are not seen as supreme moral agents. They have, in most, they'll have an orientation toward the world that's like, if you conjure by the name of, say, Zeus or Hermes, you better keep your word, because if you don't, you've taken their name in vain, and they'll come after you, or they'll try to smite you. It takes really big societies, lots of people together, to get moralizing gods. And I'm not saying this with, let me emphasize, I'm not saying this as some kind of shade. This is not no aspersions. I'm saying this is an ecological feature of human societies. This is how cultures actually develop. A moralizing God is a good thing to have. Look at the Old Testament. The idea of God as this powerful entity who strikes fear. That's actually a really good thing to have, to get people to be pro-social and to stop some of the worst excesses of behavior that people will engage in if you don't control them somehow, if we don't control ourselves somehow. And if you don't have, farther along in the process, you can use things like guilt and shame. But early on, it seems to be the case that fear is the only thing that really works to get that process going, as far as I'm aware, in terms of what I've managed to come across. And I'm, lots of things I don't know. Somebody who is more knowledgeable than me wants to tell me I'm wrong. I'm happy to listen. That was a long walk for a short drink of mushroom coffee.
Mike, carry on.
So I during this talk, I actually got onto Amazon and bought your audiobook.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
Who does your audiobooks?
I saw that it is
Virtual Voice.
Yeah.
It is a computerized voice. Amazon offered me the chance to do that. I decided to take it, and my wife has been listening to the audiobooks for 4 and 5. She says that they're pretty good. I mean, it's not perfect. I would like to pay somebody to do it properly someday, but she says that for right now, it's pretty good, and I actually like the voice that I chose. I think it adds a lot of color, a lot of flavor.
How does it work with, words that you made up?
Well, that's the fun part. I have to go and edit those myself, so it's actually not too hard. You go into the program and you say, okay, let's play how you pronounce that word, and if it's not correct, and often it's not correct. Sometimes there's a number. So, oh wow, you said that perfect. But what you do is you can give it a phonetic pronunciation, and you just mess around with it until it's what you want it to be. So you may end up giving the program a way to pronounce that name that you're just typing out. So, where did Ro go? Did we lose Ro?
We lost Ro, but that's okay. We'll celebrate later. Keep going.
Come back, Ro. So you give it a way to pronounce the name that is phonetic, and you may have to mess around with that and use different combinations of letters so you get, let's see. There's some of them were kind of colorful. Welcome back, Ro. It isn't that hard to just give it different ways. Like you say, okay, so for this name, Rostaval or Gaita or whoever, I say, okay, yeah, so you pronounce it like this, and so there's a different little box where I type in how it should pronounce it, and you just keep going. You just keep going until you have, what you want. And sometimes it's pretty easy. Sometimes you have to be a little bit creative, and one or two of those names, I'm like, okay, this is good enough. This is about what I wanted, and if it's not 100% how I pronounce it, that's okay.
Does the AI do voices for characters, or do you have to leave in all the
No, it doesn't do that.
So you have to leave in all the he said, Bob said, whatever?
I'm personally, I find that I did, and I'm okay with that. I think I think that for me, those are mostly invisible in the sense that it's just like my brain is like, oh, okay, yeah, this character's talking, that character's talking. Like, I don't know how it is for other people, but like for me, he said, she said, that's never been a problem. I think, and I apologize, my dog is barking in the background, so just ignore him.
So I do have to tell you, Ro, that it's a shame that El Montague is not here, because when I was going to put John's thing up here, I think I hit remove for you, and that's why you left.
Is that what you did? You threw me out?
Yep, it was a
nice.
sheer act
Look
of
at that. So EL gets thrown out and I get thrown. Damn. That's harsh, man.
Nobody's safe. Next time
what did I do?
Yep, I can remove myself if necessary.
So, Michael, are you going to get into Spiffbo this year?
Well, this year, so I don't have a qualifying book this year. This book is really, it's space opera. Now, it has a lot of kind of fantasy feel to it from my perspective, but I didn't want to, I felt like it would not be fair to enter it. The simple reason it is more of a space opera book, and so I didn't want to, I felt like I'd be pushing it too much, and, you know, I want to emphasize, I'm really happy that I had a chance to do Spiffbo 9, and I'm looking forward to hopefully being back at some point. My plan is to attempt to enter the first book of my new project, this Bronze Age fantasy I've been yabbling, talking about for a long this whole time. I'm going to try and enter that into the next Spiffbo where it's actually published, which may be Spiffbo 11, but is probably more likely to be Spiffbo 12 because this is such a huge project. I'm writing a story that's going to be, I have to split into multiple books, probably 3, and the books will be pretty big, even split up. So my thinking is that the most likely scenario is that I will not have that ready to enter into Spiffbo until Spiffbo 12. But as long as it's still going, and yeah, we'll see with the whole lottery thing how that works.
Yeah. So the amount of research you do probably precludes you putting out 2 books a year.
Well, that's not necessarily true. I had 3 last year, but these 2 here were both in the month of August because it was one big story, and to keep the same formatting that I used for the rest of the series, I needed to do something, and what I chose to do was to split it up, so it's one story in two books. And they're not, I'll show you, spines. These are not the biggest or thickest books, but they're each on the order of, you know, like the first one is close to 400 pages. The second one is, you know, 460 or so pages.
Both acceptable. I always tell people I won't read fantasy books over 500 pages, so it really limits what fantasy I can read.
Well, there's some great books that you might be missing out on then, because
yeah, that's so arbitrary, man.
Well, it was 400, but my books were pushing 400, so I was like, okay, I'll give myself a little space.
Okay.
My wife said that I should do a shorter book, and so this is like 200 pages. Okay. Space opera.
Are you going to enter that in Spacebo?
Spacebo? The SP, what's the self-published?
Yeah. Science fiction competition, yeah.
Let's see. I will look into that. That's a great question. I had not even, why didn't I think about that? That's a great idea.
Entry is in July sometime. Or
I think there's time.
It's in August, but you have to have it published in July or something like that. So. And
it's already published, so hopefully that's no problem. Yeah, I should. Well, thank you. I will look into that, and I'll see if it could be a good fit. Do they do some space opera too, or is it more hard sci-fi?
No, it's any sci-fi.
Oh, great.
For instance, Wistful Ascending was in the Spacebo.
That looks so trippy. The superhero and the magic, or is it magic?
No,
He's got some
no
kind of
magic.
advanced.
He's more like
okay.
a retired Superman in space, who's
that's
kind
cool.
of like hates life.
He's a
This is
curmudgeon
sounding.
superhero.
Okay, curmudgeon. Yeah.
Fantastic.
This is sounding interesting.
And they have space bears, so that sound like Russians.
Oh, that sounds like a real trip. I'll have to actually.
Wistful Ascending is one of my favorite books that I've read in the last several years. I mean, I hate Marvel. I hate superheroes. There's no.
Yeah, I don't like superheroes, Marvel, all that.
There's
Thank
no
God
reason
Wistful
to
Ascending
like this book,
was
but
less
I do.
than 500 pages, huh?
Yeah, it's like 120, so it's like right there on the edge.
Great.
We got time for one more roll of the die there, Mike?
We do. Let's see. Number 6 is I told you this one before too, Ro, before we got here. If your book were adapted into a board game, what would the objective be, and what would the pieces look like?
Oh my God! Okay. If we're going with these books, the objective would be, conquer the kingdom and get slave girls, and the pieces would probably be, warriors on horseback with bows and arrows.
I got to interrupt you. What does your wife think about the whole concubinage and...
She is a big fan of these books.
Okay, all right.
That's a good question. She has enjoyed these books.
She doesn't give you the old side eye every now and then?
Well, no, not really, no. No, she's been a wonderful source of encouragement. Actually, these books, the first three I dedicated the first three to her. I had basically given up on this project altogether. Like before I met her, I had an earlier version of this, and then she read that, and I said, "Oh, it's not very." Honestly, it's not very good. But she read it; she actually liked it. So, we disagreed on that. But she has excellent taste in books. She really does. So, she got me thinking about it, and I decided to give it one more go, and that led ultimately to this, which, well, not perfect, is still miles and miles better than the thing that she read. And so, yeah, she's a great source of encouragement and has really helped me to see things in the story and the characters that I might not have seen without her input. So, yeah, I owe a great... Oh, so Mibble Art is the company. Mm-hmm. I will...
You are not the first to respond thusly.
They do the covers, and yeah.
So do you go to Comic-Cons? Do you advertise on like Amazon or Facebook? How do you sell your books? Do you throw them at people?
Well, okay, so that's the thing. I'm still working on the selling of the books thing. I don't go to Comic-Cons, but that doesn't seem like a good idea. I'm trying to get better at everything that I'm doing at this point, and one thing I want to get better at is selling the books. So my plan at this point is to treat this new series, this new project, as I'm doing what I didn't do before, which is I'm researching the market, a thing that I did was
crazy talk.
Yeah, I mean, this is a thing that I should have done, and that I was not very smart because I didn't do it. And so I'm doing a lot of research on the market that I'm trying to sell to. So I'm going to pitch my cover design and my blurbs and everything at the market that I'm going for with this new Bronze Age fantasy. So I am about to be a lot smarter at that than I have been so far. But yeah, I'd say I've kind of made some beginner's mistakes along the way. I've tried Amazon advertising. I've spent some money. It hasn't worked very well. I've never made any money back. So that's been not the best thing. And so I thought about that. Okay, what's...
Yeah.
Oh, have you guys...
Thanks you.
Say again?
Jeff Bezos thanks you.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I definitely made him some money.
And where did you say in Oregon you're from? I missed that part.
Springfield, next to Eugene. Yes, writing to market. That's what I'm doing now. I did not do that before, and I now count that. I'm very, this is the thing. some folks cannot write to market, and they do fantastic, and I respect that enormously. I really do. I think that is one of the problems that I've had with these books, is that I just had this crazy out there idea, but I had this crazy out there idea as a new guy, a new author whom no one knows yet. So I think that's been some of my problem. I also have some, I think the covers are fun, but I'm not sure that it's really what I want to be going for. So I've gotten some feedback on that I should think about doing those over. So I may do them all over at some point. And I've given that some thought as well. I've given cover design for the new series a lot of consideration, and I'm going to do that much more to market. Trying to hit, just for a bit of context, I'm defining my market like the 2 points that I want to sort of be shared center of gravity. Two points here would be Brian Lee Durfee and John Gwynn, and I want to get that market bang over the target. And thank you, Mr. Byrne. I appreciate that. It has been the craft is the fun part for me, because I get better. I like to think every book, but certainly over time I've gotten better. And even if some of the things that I wrote make me cringe now, I go, well, but you're better than that now. And the next book will be better. And, 10 years may pass and you may cringe at that. And part of the journey. And marketing, like I said, we can't all be Devin Erickson, author of Theft of Fire, another excellent book. But we can learn from the best, right?
Yep. Let's see. Michael, is there any question we should have asked you and we were derelict in our duty and we did not ask you?
It wouldn't be the first time.
Well, I would say that if I had to summarize, the purpose of my writing really is I'm trying to contribute to cultural and spiritual renaissance in America and the West, really. And that's one thing we didn't really get at. So I'll just unpack that a little bit. I look back at the history of I look back at fantasy fiction and at inspiration for fantasy fiction, and I like stories of action and adventure. Edgar Rice Burroughs was one I was really into. Maybe 20 years ago, but his books have really stayed with me. And there's lots of lovely, wonderful fantasy stories in the present, but I see a lot of the kind of, A Song of Ice and Fire. Well, let's have a postmodern deconstruction of fantasy, and some of that is actually really, I enjoy some of that, but after a while, I want a sense of heroism. Yeah, and that's what I would say I really enjoy. I'm reading David Gemmel's book, Legend. I just started that last night, and I'm really digging it. There's something about that, how that strand of fantasy fiction, not even all that long ago, where we can have, flawed characters, but then there's that ultimate sense of heroism. You get some of that in Song of Ice and Fire, but ultimately it's a deconstruction of fantasy, of a lot of the classic fantasy, high fantasy. And okay, there's a place for that, but I want to see this in terms of how do we tell stories that change the civilizational zeitgeist? You look at the great men of history: Alexander, Caesar, Napoleon, the great conquerors, the Spartan warriors, the Roman legions, the Anglo-Saxons who conquered Britannia, the Crusaders, the conquistadors, like people who did incredible things, and people will spill ink talking about the morality of it, or they did this bad thing. People reshape the world through vision, through heroism, through having this audacity to impose their will on the world, and that to me is endlessly fascinating. Someone like Napoleon, rides out of the French Revolution, changes the world in a variety of ways. Some of them for the worse, some for the better. And now here we are 200 years later. He's still a household name. That fascinates me. Alexander the Great conquering Persia. How does that not set the mind on fire? So I look at that. I look at the Odyssey. Odysseus trying to get home. This whole mythic journey. I want to tell stories that have plenty of grandeur and tragedy, but also have grandeur and heroism, and that can, in my view, I think telling those kinds of stories is going to be very important for addressing the diseased and disordered state of civilization, of society as it exists now. And for inspiring people to think of how we can remake the world in a Promethean sort of way. Prometheus bringing fire from the gods, and he was punished for it terribly, but the world was never the same because of that great heroic act. That almost a Faustian kind of a thing, where you do this profound thing, you get great power, and you change the world. And you don't have to be I mean, it's the simplest thing in the world. You don't have to have any special insight or special genius to say that the state of not only America but the Western world today is diseased, it's disordered, it's decadent. There's no belief in higher purpose. There's no will to power anymore, and it's hard to look at that and not think, what do we do to change that? How do we bring back some of that fire in the belly? How do we take fire from the gods a second time, another time? How do we get the best of the ruthlessness, of the drive, of the audacity of an Alexander, of a Caesar, of a Napoleon? And that, I think, is in many ways the question that culture creators would do well to ask themselves, because stories really are the software that human society is run on, if you think about it. It's mythic drama that tells us who we are and where we are, what we should be doing. And if you're not oriented toward excellence, sort of pole star of excellence, then what? I mean, and I think we know what we have. We have a society that's drowning in anxiety and misdirection and all manner of disorder. And the task that is always before us is to take responsibility for angling ourselves upward towards self-overcoming in the Nietzschean sense. But also a lot of, I would point to mythic parallels, like, the Christian side of the tradition is, Christ is a good example. But so on a more pagan, more in terms of what I'm doing with my work, Odin is a good example. So are the great Indo-European hero gods. And so I think bringing some of that spirit of the Indo-European heroic adventurers and gods back into the world is really the purpose of everything that I'm trying to do, not just with these books, but with all my books. And that's the answer to your question.
Cool.
And I think that is a good place to end and
Fair enough.
The next TED Talk we have.
I'll look forward to it.
It's going to be what, Friday?
Yes, it is.
Friday. All right.
With whom?
Jonathan Weiss, I believe. God, I hope I'm right. I only scheduled.
Hold on. Let me check while you're.
I'll have to catch that one.
Let's see here. I'm looking. Yes, Jonathan Weiss. Woo! I was right. So he is Australian. So we're doing it at 7 p.m. our time. So I think it's like noon his time on Saturday.
Well, I'll look forward to that. Gentlemen, thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. We appreciate you hanging out with us. Hopefully,
my pleasure.
Hopefully this doesn't backfire on you horribly.
It's all good.
All right.
Okay. And with that, let's all wave awkwardly.